The Psychology of Overthinking, Part 1. The prison that looks like intelligence. At first, it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like intelligence. You notice patterns other people miss. You replay conversations with surgical precision. You anticipate what could go wrong before anyone else even thinks about it. So you call it being careful, being mature, being responsible. But there's a moment, quiet, almost embarrassing, when you realize the truth. You're not thinking. You're trapped. Because overthinking doesn't make you wiser. It makes you stuck. It convinces you that if you analyze something long enough, the pain will dissolve. If you predict every outcome, nothing can hurt you. If you rehearse every conversation, you'll never be humiliated again. Overthinking sells you safety, and then it collects its price. Sleep, confidence, presence, joy, and eventually, time. You lose hours to mental loops that end exactly where they began. You lose opportunities because you weren't ready yet. You lose relationships because your mind can't accept uncertainty. And worst of all, you begin to lose trust in yourself because you stop living from instinct. You start living from fear disguised as logic. If you've ever been awake at 2:47 a.m., with your heart racing over something that happened 3 years ago, if you've ever stared at a simple decision and felt your brain turn it into a life or death trial, if you've ever felt exhausted from thoughts you didn't even choose to think, then you already know. Overthinking isn't deep. It's a form of mental self-defense that turned into a habit and then became an identity. Tonight, we're going beneath the mask, not to shame your mind, but to expose what it's really trying to do. Because once you understand why you overthink, you stop fighting yourself blindly. You start dismantling the machine. Let's begin with something most people get wrong. Overthinking is not too many thoughts. It's a specific pattern, a loop that feeds on three things: uncertainty, emotion, and control. Here's how it starts. You experience uncertainty, something you can't predict, a message that isn't replied to, a facial expression that seems off, a silence that feels loaded, a decision that might change your life. Your brain hates uncertainty because uncertainty is vulnerability, and vulnerability means you might get hurt. So your mind does what it evolved to do. It searches for control. It says, let's run this again. Let's check every angle. Let's find the hidden meaning. Let's make sure. But the loop has a secret. It doesn't end when you find the answer. It ends when you feel safe. And safety is not a logical condition. It's an emotional state. That's why you can solve something 10 different ways and still feel uneasy. Your brain isn't looking for truth. It's looking for relief. And overthinking becomes your substitute for relief, like a mental pacifier. It calms you for a moment. Then it brings the fear back stronger. Because the more you overthink, the more your brain learns. Fear is important. Keep focusing on it, so the loop deepens. And slowly, you become the kind of person who isn't afraid of failure. You're afraid of not being able to predict it. That's the first mask. Overthinking pretends to be intelligence, but it's often anxiety wearing a suit. And if you want proof, ask yourself this. When you overthink, do you feel more powerful or more paralyzed? Because deep thinking produces movement. Overthinking produces hesitation, self-doubt, and an endless need for certainty that life will never provide. And here's the part most people don't want to admit. Overthinking is not just a habit. It's a coping strategy, a way to avoid feeling something directly, a way to avoid risk, a way to avoid being fully present. Because presence means you might have to face reality. Which brings us to the real question. Why do some minds overthink more than others? Why does one person shrug and sleep, while another person loops for weeks? To answer that, we need to look at what overthinking is really protecting. Part 2. Why your brain does this. Overthinking often begins in environments where being wrong felt unsafe. Maybe not physically unsafe, but emotionally unsafe, where mistakes were punished instead of corrected, where your feelings were dismissed, where your choices were criticized, where silence from someone important meant danger. And over time, your brain adapted. It learned that the best way to survive is to anticipate, to predict, to stay ahead. Because if you can predict the emotional weather, you can avoid the storm. This is why overthinking is common in people who are highly sensitive to social cues, perfectionistic, emotionally conscientious, intelligent, and imaginative, shaped by unpredictable relationships. Your mind becomes a hyperactive radar. It scans everything for risk. Not because you're weak, because you learned risk had consequences. And once your brain learns this pattern early, it turns into a default setting. That default setting has two main engines. 1. Rumination. Rumination is replaying the past like a courtroom trial. You become both prosecutor and defendant. You revisit what you said, what you should have said, what they meant, what you meant, what you looked like, what they might tell other people. Rumination gives you the illusion of control over the past. But the past is not a problem you can solve. It's an experience you can only integrate, and rumination prevents integration because it keeps the wound open. 2. Worry. Worry is rehearsing the future like a disaster film. You play worst-case outcomes on repeat. You imagine rejection. You imagine humiliation. You imagine loss. And because your brain can't distinguish between imagination and reality emotionally, your body responds as if it's happening. Your heart beats faster. Your stomach tightens. Your muscles tense, so you become anxious. Then your mind tries to solve the anxiety by thinking more. This is the feedback loop. Anxiety, overthinking, more anxiety, more overthinking. And here's the ugly truth. Overthinking can become addictive, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. It's the known pain. And the brain often prefers known pain over unknown freedom, because freedom requires risk. And risk is what the overthinker fears most, not the event itself, but the uncertainty around it. Now, let's talk about the social side. Overthinking doesn't just happen in isolation. It thrives in relationships, especially when you care about being understood. You overthink because you care about being seen accurately. You care about not being misjudged. You care about not being rejected. So you analyze what someone really meant. You replay their tone, their punctuation, their delay in responding. And the more you do this, the more you become psychologically dependent on external signals. Your mood becomes a hostage to other people's micro-behaviors. This is why overthinking often appears alongside people-pleasing. If you grew up learning that approval equals safety, your mind becomes obsessed with managing perception. You're not just trying to live, you're trying to avoid becoming a target. So you polish yourself mentally. You rehearse, you adjust, you second guess. And the longer this runs, the more you forget what your real instinct feels like. Because your instinct gets drowned out by strategy, and strategy creates distance from yourself. This is where the story turns darker. Because overthinking doesn't just waste time. It shapes identity. It turns you into a person who believes, I need certainty before I act. If I feel anxious, it means something is wrong. If I don't think of every outcome, I'm irresponsible. My thoughts are warnings I must obey. Over time, you begin to confuse thoughts with truth. But thoughts are not truth. Thoughts are guesses. Thoughts are stories. Thoughts are sometimes just fear wearing your voice. If you're watching this, and part of you is thinking, okay, but how do I stop? Hold that question. Because the answer isn't stop thinking. The answer is learning to think differently. But first, we need to expose the moment overthinking becomes a weapon against you. The moment it turns from analysis into self-destruction, that moment is the climax. And it's the moment most overthinkers live in daily. Part 3, the climax. when thoughts become a form of self-harm. There is a point where overthinking stops being problem-solving and becomes self-harm, not physical, psychological, because the loop stops being what happened and becomes what's wrong with me. Overthinking turns inward. It becomes identity-level doubt. You don't just analyze the situation, you analyze your worth. You start believing the problem isn't the decision, it's you. And here's how that happens. Overthinking often attacks in the moments when action is required. When you're about to take a step forward, a new relationship, a job change, a creative project, a boundary you need to set, a truth you need to speak. Action means exposure. Exposure means vulnerability. So the brain panics and it produces a new strategy. Analysis as avoidance. You tell yourself you're being responsible, but what you're really doing is postponing the moment where you might fail. Overthinking becomes procrastination with a higher IQ, and it becomes a ritual. You gather more information, you ask more opinions, you simulate more outcomes, but the loop has no finish line, because the finish line is certainty, and certainty is a fantasy. This is why many overthinkers feel constantly behind in life. Not because they are less capable, but because they are stuck in preparation mode. They are always about to start living tomorrow, after they feel ready, after they feel confident, after they feel safe. And the tragedy is, safety doesn't arrive. Because overthinking trains your brain to see safety as temporary, fragile, conditional. So even when everything is fine, your mind scans for what could ruin it. That's why you can have a great day and still feel uneasy at night. Your brain doesn't trust peace. It expects the ambush. Now let's talk about the emotional cost. Overthinking keeps you constantly activated. Your nervous system never fully rests. Your body stays in a subtle state of fight or flight. That's why overthinkers often feel mentally exhausted, physically tense, emotionally numb, easily irritated, unable to enjoy the present. And here's the cruelest part. Because your mind is always busy, you begin to lose the ability to feel. You become a spectator to your own life. You watch yourself from inside your head. That is dissociation in its mild form. Living in thought instead of in experience. And it creates a strange emotional loneliness because you're never truly with people. Even when you're next to them, part of you is analyzing. Am I being weird? Did that sound stupid? Do they like me? Should I say more? Should I say less? Overthinking turns human connection into a performance review. And performances drain the soul. Now pause here for a second. If this is resonating, and you like this kind of psychological storytelling, not the shallow, just be confident nonsense, then subscribe to Beneath the Mask. Not because it helps the channel, though it does, but because if you're someone who overthinks, you need reminders like this. You need frameworks that pull you out of the loop. Consider this your anchor. Now let's finish the climax. The deepest fear beneath overthinking isn't, what if it goes wrong? It's, what if I can't handle it? Overthinking is often a lack of self-trust. You don't trust your ability to adapt, so you try to eliminate uncertainty in advance. But life doesn't reward the person who predicts everything. Life rewards the person who can respond, which means the real solution is not eliminating uncertainty, it's building capacity. Capacity to feel discomfort without collapsing. Capacity to make decisions without perfect clarity. Capacity to survive being misunderstood. Capacity to recover from mistakes. And this is where the overthinker's mind must learn a new skill, to let thoughts exist without obeying them. Because thoughts are not commands, they are events, a cloud crossing the sky. The mistake overthinkers make is trying to fight the cloud. But you can't fight clouds. You can only stop chasing them. So how do you stop chasing? That's the final part. Part 4. How to break the loop. If overthinking is a loop, then breaking it requires one thing: interrupting the pattern before it becomes identity. Here are the psychological keys told simply. Because overthinkers don't need more complexity. They need clarity. 1. Name the loop. The moment you notice the spiral, say it plainly. This is rumination. This is worry. This is my brain searching for control. Naming creates distance. Distance restores choice. Overthinking thrives when you believe the thought is you. But a thought is not you. It is something your brain produced, often automatically. 2. Ask the brutal question. Overthinking looks like problem solving. Expose it by asking, is this helping me act or helping me avoid? If it's avoidance, stop calling it intelligence. Call it what it is, fear. And fear doesn't deserve the steering wheel. 3. Replace certainty with a better goal. Stop seeking certainty. Seek enough. Enough information. Enough clarity. Enough alignment. Most decisions don't need perfect confidence. They need a direction and a willingness to adjust. 4. Build self-trust through small actions. Self-trust is not a belief. It's evidence. You create evidence by acting while uncertain and surviving it. Start small. Send the message. Make the call. Set the boundary. Choose the option. Then watch your brain learn a new truth. I can handle outcomes. When your brain truly believes you can handle outcomes, it stops obsessing over predicting them. 5. Learn to feel without solving. This is the hardest part, because overthinking is often a way to avoid emotion. So practice sitting with sensation. When you feel anxiety, don't ask why. Ask, where is it in my body? Chest? Stomach? Throat? Breathe into it. Let it be there without turning it into a story, because emotions pass faster when you stop interrogating them. 6. One simple reflection. Here's a reflection that cuts through the fog. Overthinking is the mind's attempt to earn safety, but safety is earned through presence and self-trust, not prediction. So the next time your mind tries to trap you in a loop, try this. I don't need to solve this right now. I need to live. Now listen carefully. Overthinking is not a personal failure. It's a survival strategy that outlived its purpose. Your mind learned it when it needed protection, but you're not that person anymore. And the more you treat your thoughts as absolute truth, the more you remain trapped in the past. But when you see thoughts for what they are, guesses, rehearsals, fear stories, you regain the one thing overthinking steals from you: agency. And when you regain agency, life becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You stop needing perfect words. You stop needing perfect timing. You stop needing perfect certainty. You choose. You adjust. You move. That is what mentally free people do. Not because they have fewer thoughts, but because they don't let thoughts rule them. If you want a final image to remember this by, picture a person standing at the edge of a dark ocean. The overthinker stands on the shore forever, calculating waves. The free person steps in, not because they know the ocean, but because they trust they can swim. If this video gave you language for something you've been silently battling, then do 2 things. First, subscribe to Beneath the Mask, because we don't just talk about psychology here. We weaponize understanding against manipulation and against the mind's darker habits. Second, leave a comment with 1 sentence. What is your mind trying to control? Because when you answer that honestly, you'll start seeing your overthinking not as a curse, but as a clue. And once you see the clue, you can finally stop living inside your head and return to your life.